sheet. If you have any questions, please feel free to ask after the service. There's an analogy from a theologian, a guy by the name of Dr. Robert Rayburn. And he would tell this all the time, and he would say that, imagine that you're walking through the city, and a beggar comes up to you. The beggar asks you for some money, for some food. And you reach into your pocket, and you pull out $7. You have $7, and you realize, well, I got to buy some bread on the way home. And that bread's going to cost me $1. So you take out 6 of the dollars and hold one for yourself and give the beggar the $6. Say, here you go. Hope you can find enough food with this. And the beggar takes the $6 and is angered and slaps you with his right hand and takes the other dollar out of your left hand and says, how dare you keep that dollar for yourself? Now, who hears that and says the beggar is right in that situation? Who listens to that analogy and thinks he was justified in being upset at only being the 6 and having us hold back one for ourselves? Dr. Rayburn would then say, how is it that we, sinners saved by grace, take the days that God has given us, the 6 that he has given us to do our work, and then we take his day that he's kept for himself for ourselves as well? It's the same pride, the same selfishness, the same emotion that would cause a beggar to take that dollar, none of which was his to begin with, right? So today we are in Exodus chapter 20. We're looking at what we call the 10 Commandments, and we are seeing them as commitments. The commitments that God is asking his people to make to him. These are kind of like wedding vows. And if you remember the first time we looked at these, we saw that these were divided in 2 ways. One, the first 4 were about how people reacted with God, their relationship with God. And then the last 6 were about their relationships with one another. And so this is the 4th commandment, the final one where we talk about our relationship with God and how we make these commitments to God. And the final one is about this day that God asks his people to set aside as holy. And so as we look at this commandment about the Sabbath, we're going to see that it's about far more than coming to church, about far more than a Sunday morning at 10 a.m. But it speaks to us about rest, about work, about worship, and remembering what God has done for us in Christ Jesus. So let's read this commandment first, Exodus chapter 20. We're going to read verse 8 and 9. This is the 4th commitment that God calls his people to. Remember to observe the Sabbath day by keeping it holy. You have 6 days each week for your ordinary work, but the 7th day is a Sabbath day of rest dedicated to the Lord your God. On that day, no one in your household may do any work. This includes you, your sons and daughters, your male and female servants, your livestock, and any foreigners living among you. For in 6 days the Lord made the heavens, the earth, the sea, and everything in them. But on the 7th day he rested. That is why the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and set it apart as holy. There are 3 things. The first question we ask each time is, what is the commandment? What is God asking of his people? And there are 3 parts to this commandment I want you to look at. The first is that first word, remember. This day is about remembrance. Remembrance of creation, remembrance of redemption. We see this commandment given here in Exodus 20, and then again in Deuteronomy 5. Each week we have talked about how Moses reiterated the commands in Deuteronomy before they entered the promised land and how he further explains them to the people. And so in Exodus 20, what we just read here, we see that God tells them in remembering this day that he points them to creation, right? God created for 6 days, and then on the seventh day, he rested. Now, we understand this. God wasn't tired, right? God didn't need a break. That isn't what God was doing. God, the word Sabbath means to cease, to stop. God stopped his work that day. And so God was not resting and taking a break. What God was doing was he was creating a day for his people to stop, to cease working, and to find rest. And so we remember in creation what God has done, how God created us, what God created for us, and that God created this day for us to find the rest that he has for us. But in Deuteronomy, God doesn't point to creation. He points to the Exodus. He points to their freedom from slavery. Take this day to remember the redemption that I gave you from Egypt. And so this day is meant to set aside to remember all that God has done for us. He tells them the rest of the week you can focus on where you're going, but on this one day I want you to focus on where you've been and how I've brought you from where you were to where you are. Remember the things that I've done for you. The second aspect of this command we see here is rest. God calls for them to rest. It is the purpose that God specifically cites here as the reason for the Sabbath. We cease from our ordinary labors. That's what he says. Now remember, they have already been taught this principle. They were already collecting manna. God was sending them manna from heaven, and they would do that for 6 days. And then on the seventh day, they would take a break. And God, in doing that, was teaching them that if they would work for those 6 days, he would provide for them on this day where they took a break. It was as if he was already overcoming the excuse of, but if I don't work this day, I won't have what I need. He was showing them he was going to provide for them even in this day where they would rest. Finally, we see he says, set it apart as holy. It's the Lord's day. It's not set aside for us, it's set aside for him. It's not just for their benefit. God sets this day as dedicated to him. Leviticus calls this a holy convocation, which is a reference to worship. They worshiped God on this day. This is how Jesus practiced worship. We see it throughout the Gospels. On the Sabbath day, he would go to the synagogues, and he would hear the scriptures. Sometimes would read them. Sometimes he would participate, but he went through this in his life. He followed this, and on the Sabbath day, he set it apart for God, and he set it apart for the Father to go and worship him. So, it is for their benefit, but it's also for God's glory. It's meant to be set aside for him, not for them. So, we ask this each time as we think about these commitments. What do the commitments say about God, and what do they say about us? And we're going to focus on what they mean for us today. But I want to give you a few quick things that they tell us about who God is. Because it's a double-ended commitment, right? It's our relationship, so they always speak to who God is. So this commandment reminds us that God is the creator of all things. Even a day to rest, God has created for us. It's a reminder that God is the redeemer of all people. He tells them, remember the redemption that I've given you from Egypt. So God set this apart so that we can remember that redemption. And finally, it reminds us that God is at work for us. It's not just about rest, it's about the work that God is doing, has done, and will continue to do for us. But what does it mean for me today? And it starts with this very important question. What day is the Sabbath day? This Saturday? Is it Sunday? Because it talks about the seventh day, and Sunday's the first day, right? So are we here on the wrong day? That's the question. Now, for them, for the people that Moses is talking to. In the Old Testament, in the Old Covenant, the seventh day was the Sabbath. Saturday is the Sabbath under the Old Covenant. It was the day that Jesus went to the synagogue to worship. So why do we come on Sundays? Well, if we look in the New Testament, there's two different verses I want to point out to you. Acts chapter 20, verse 7. Notice it says, on the first day of the week, we gathered with the local believers to share in the Lord's Supper. 1 Corinthians 1:2. On the first day of the week, you should each put aside a portion of the money you've earned. Don't wait until I get there and then try to collect it all at once. So we see the early church has transitioned from meeting on the seventh day to meeting on the first day. They did this because Jesus rose from the dead on the first day. And so in the same way that the original Sabbath was created as a day to remember God's creation and redemption, the early church begins to worship on Sunday in a way that commemorates the new creation that we find from the resurrection of Jesus and the redemption that it offers us in him. It is meant to remember the same things. First century church father Ignatius said this, that Christians no longer observe the Sabbath, but direct their lives towards the Lord's Day, in which our lives are refreshed by him. So, those who received this commandment on Mount Sinai, the Sabbath was Saturday for them. But for us today, the redemption we've received is on the Lord's Day. And this is the heart of what we remember. Beyond that, the Apostle Paul talks about this as well when he writes to Gentiles, to people who are now Christians, who believe in Jesus, but they're not Jewish. They're not under this old covenant that Moses gave. So listen to a few of the things he wrote. Colossians chapter 2, verse 16 and 17. So don't let anyone condemn you for what you eat or drink, or for not celebrating certain holy days or new moon ceremonies or Sabbaths. For these rules are only shadows of the reality yet to come, and Christ himself is that reality. Romans 14:5. In the same way, some think one day is more holy than another day, while others think every day is alike. You should each be fully convinced that whichever day you choose is acceptable. In Galatians 4:10 and 11, you are trying to earn favor with God by observing certain days or months or seasons or years. I fear for you. Perhaps all my hard work with you was for nothing. So when he writes to these early Gentile Christians who are not under the Jewish law, he tells them, these Jewish leaders are going to come and try and convince you you have to follow this Sabbath. But he very clearly says these rules were put in place. They were shadows of what was yet to come. A shadow shows you the general shape of an image, right? But it doesn't show you very much about who the person is. Now he says, but Jesus has come, and he was what the shadow pointed to. He's the reality. So we don't have to follow these laws anymore because they point to something that we've now come to realize in its fullness. So we no longer follow these ceremonies, these civil laws, but instead, he clearly says, choose whatever day works for you. So I want to summarize what Paul says, and these are not my words. I don't remember where I heard them. I'm giving credit to somebody. It's not me. But they said it this way. The civil aspect of the command of the Sabbath has expired. The ceremonial aspect of the Sabbath has been fulfilled. But the moral aspect of the Sabbath remains. So all of the legal ceremonial, this day or that day, the Pharisees making these rules and laws about what you can do and what you can't do, what's ordinary work, what's not ordinary work, all that's gone. And yet there's this moral obligation for us to Sabbath. So what is the moral obligation? There are three things that are part of that moral obligation, and this is what Sabbath means for us. In other words, the question of whether it's Saturday or Sunday isn't the right question. What day of the week do I do it on? It's the wrong question. The question is, what does Sabbath really mean for me in my relationship with God? What does that look like? And God tells us there's three things that are part of Sabbath. God created us for rest. We are not supposed to work all the time. Your body needs rest. And rest is rooted in creation. It's rooted in our redemption. And the kind of rest that you need, it might vary for all of us. Some of us need that physical rest. We need a break from the labors. Some of you need emotional rest, and you need a break from people or relationships or things. And some of us, we need a mental rest. You need a way to stop thinking about all the things that are going on. So we need different kinds of rests in our lives, but each and every one of them are rests that are important for us, that serve to make us more capable of doing the work that God has for us the other 6 days of the week. God created us for rest. But part of Sabbath is also that God created us for work. He doesn't say rest 7 days a week. He says work 6, rest 1. Colossians 3:23 says, work willingly at whatever you do as though you were working for the Lord rather than for people. And so God says, I want you to work, and I want you to work in a way that it points to me. We don't work for ourselves. We don't work for the companies. We don't work for our bosses. We work for the Lord. And whatever we do for Him. And so what that means is when I put on a uniform, when I put on the name tag, when I go into the office, I am going there for the glory of God. And what I do might be underappreciated. And what I do might be overlooked. And what I do may not feel important to me or to someone else. But we don't do it for ourselves. We don't do it for others. We do it for the Lord. And if it's overlooked and underappreciated, so too was the work that Jesus did for us. We're created to work. And that's a part of the Sabbath as well. We need rest because we work for the Lord these other days. But finally, God created us for rest. God created us for work. God created us for worship. We can't forget that this day was set aside as holy. It's God's. So when we talk about rest, that sounds great. I want a day, but we think, I want a day to myself. Rest means it's all about me. But that's not what God is saying. God is saying in this rest is all about Him. It points to Him. We're supposed to worship. So when people say, I can be a Christian, but I don't have to go to church. I can believe in Jesus, but I don't have to be a part of some kind of organized religion. Technically, they're right. The civil, the ceremonial part, that's gone. And thank God. We don't have to worry about having to ask, do I need to stone you if you go on vacation next week? Right? That aspect of the law, it is no more. We don't have to worry about that. It's gone. And yet, there's this moral obligation that we have to gather together to worship God. God calls us to come together corporately in His name. Us hypocrites and sinners and imperfect people to gather to remember our perfect God. This is set aside for Him, not for ourselves. And what I intend to do on this Lord's Day is really not about, it shouldn't be about me. It shouldn't be about what I need, what I want. There are cultural realities that we can't forget, okay? People have to work on Sundays. There's shifts that make people not able to be here. There's illnesses that make people not able to be here. People live longer, and it's harder to be here in the mornings, or we're shut in. These are all very real realities that the grace of God allows in keeping the Sabbath. We don't have to be here in this place at 10 a.m. on a Sunday morning. That part of this obligation is gone. But at the same time, we have to ask ourselves, if every minute of every day is mine and none of it's God's, how can I possibly be keeping this commitment? Some part of our life, some part of our week has to be His, set apart for Him. And if it's always all about me, we're all guilty at worshiping at the altar of ourselves. And the Sabbath is about taking a break from that and coming before the God of all creation to worship Him. So how does this point us to Jesus? What does the Sabbath have to do with Jesus? Well, Jesus gave us these words in Matthew chapter 11, verse 28. Come to me, all you who are weary and heavy burdened, and I will give you rest. Jesus promised to give us this Sabbath, this break. How many of you are weary today? That word weary means to be exhausted by using our own resources. In other words, you have problems and you're trying to fix them. You're trying to fix your depression. You're trying to fix your anxiety. You're trying to fix your worry. You're trying to fix your guilt and your grief and all those things that you're overwhelmed by. And you're worn out. You're weary because your efforts have exhausted you. How many of you are there today? How many of you are weary and you have nothing left of yourself to give anymore? How many of you are heavy burdened? That word means to have something dumped upon you, not picked up. You didn't choose it, it just got thrown on you. And how many of you are there today? You've got these people in your life that throw things on you. You've got sickness, you've got illness, you've got problems, you've got things that you did not choose, and yet they are burdens that you have to carry, whether you like it or not. Not only do the people who could help you not help you, but they seemingly like to dump even more on top of you than what you already have. So weariness is being exhausted emotionally, mentally, because we're trying to do it all ourselves. Heavy laden is the external efforts that we put in, all the effort and strength that we use to accomplish carrying these burdens that we feel like I can't move another inch with them. And Jesus says, all of you who are emotionally and mentally exhausted, trying to do it all yourselves, and all of you who are just worn out physically because you're trying to do it all on your own, and the people in your life see that, they just dump more on you. He says, come to me and give that to me. Give me your weariness. Give me your exhaustion. Give me your burdens. And I will give you Sabbath, rest, restoration, revival. That long journey of life that seems to never end. And the further and further you go, the further it seems you have to go. That journey is over when we bring it to Jesus. Come to me, and I will give you rest. Take on my burden, take on my teaching, take on my heart, and find rest for your soul, because what I have for you to carry is easy and light. This commandment today should say to you that you should remember you don't have to do it on your own. There's a God who's working for you. You have someone who created you, who designed you, who loves you, someone who's redeemed you at a great price, someone who's bought your freedom and gives you life, who now calls you to work for Him and find rest in Him. We lay those burdens down today so we can finally find rest. In 1963, a man by the name of Charles Tandy started 9 electronic do-it-yourself stores. And he did so because he found that people had a lot of leisure time. And he wanted to take advantage of that. How are people going to use this excess time that they have? That was the challenge. Leisure time is opening markets to us. That's what he said. The shorter work week, human curiosity, idle hands, all offer opportunities in this business. Everyone's spare time is our challenge. That store was known as Radio Shack. 7,000 of them opened. But something happened. See, in the 1950s, this was true. The work week was shortening, and people had more and more time. In fact, universities began to offer leisure study programs. Some of you may remember those. We don't have those anymore. In the 70s, the work week started to change. And so at the height of its profit, in 1979, Radio Shack, the average worker worked 1,687 hours a week. But by the time in 2007, when it was beginning to go under, the average work week was 1,868 hours. That's a 181-hour difference. That is more than a month's worth of work difference in that time frame. Leisure time is not our problem anymore. It's not a challenge that we have to solve. Busyness is. The greatest threat to our spiritual lives is busyness. The greatest threat to Sabbath and rest is busyness. Pastor and author Eugene Peterson once wrote, "Busyness is the enemy of spirituality. It is essentially laziness. It is doing the easy thing instead of doing the hard thing. It is filling our time with our own actions instead of paying attention to God's actions. It's us taking charge." We treat busyness like a badge of honor. When people ask us how we're doing and we say we're busy, it's like we're bragging hidden as a complaint. We're trying to say our lives are full. And I have so much to do. And if I have things to do, I can't possibly have a life that's empty or meaningless or trivial. And if I'm booked every hour and on demand every day, I must mean something. We become addicted to busyness because what are we if we're not constantly consumed? I'm going to ask the worship team to come forward. And as they're coming forward, I want to give you some ways to overcome busyness. Busyness is the enemy of rest. So how do we overcome that busyness that overwhelms our culture and our lives and find a rest? Number one, take a Sabbath from the things that keep you busy when you're idle. The truth is we often have times, but we've scrolled through videos for so long. We've wasted so much time doing things that are in just our idle time that it fills our time in a way that makes us think we're busier than we are. Sleep. Sometimes the most holy thing you can do is take a nap. Because God created us to sleep. Sleep is like our daily Sabbath, a daily rest and restoration. It's a way for us to come back to where God has created us to be. Prioritize. There are big things that we can't let slide in life. There are responsibilities that we can't forget. But there are things that we let consume us that we shouldn't. The dishes can be done later. The errand can wait. Keep the small things small and don't let them consume you. Take control of your calendar. Don't let it control you. We can stop worrying. Jesus told us that let tomorrow worry about itself. We don't let tomorrow's problems add to today's stress. Handle today, rest for tomorrow. And finally, don't feel guilty. Because someone already, I know, I said the dishes can wait, and some of you are freaking out. Right? Don't feel guilty and overwhelmed because you didn't do something. That guilt steals your rest. Rest first, busyness later. Put your priorities back in order and start finding the Sabbath rest that God created you for. We're going to finish with this song, the King of Kings, that reminds us all of who Jesus is, because we come back to the beginning, and the Sabbath was about, first and foremost, remember. Remember what the God has created you has done for you. And then we come to the table where he told us to do this to remember what I've done for you. We're going to be reminded of why we Sabbath, of why we can rest, because we have been redeemed by the King of Kings. We no longer have to work for salvation, but we can rest in the labor of the cross and know that we have been taken care of for eternity because of it. So let's stand and do what he asks us to do and worship him today and give him praise for who he is, for what he's done, and for who will always be. Let's sing today to the King of Kings.